Temperatures in East Texas have reached triple digits for weeks. It can cause sunburns and physical fatigue. But what kind of effect does it have on your mental well-being? KLTV's Lauren Tier spoke with mental health experts about the heat strain on the brain and what precautions people should be taking.
Any kind of stressor on the body is going to be a stressor for the mind.
Licensed professional counselor Martha Carney says the heat causes discomfort, which weakens the mind's decision-making abilities and causes people to be more irritable. The excessive heat can cause impairments because it disrupts the neurotransmitters in the brain. Neurotransmitters are responsible for the communication in your body, including your body's response to temperature regulation. Mental health specialist and advanced practice registered nurse, Dr. Sandra Peterson, says she has seen the effects firsthand this summer.
In my patient population and discussing it with my students who are, of course, seeing patients in clinical, we've seen an uptick in a variety of things that I think we can legitimately attribute to mental health concerns regarding heat.
She also noted that the heat does not always mix well with certain medications.
We might see, for instance, with those who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, those people might worsen in some of their symptomatology and may exacerbate with symptoms that they haven't seen in a long time simply because of the lack of thermoregulation that it can be attributed to their medications.
Her biggest recommendation, think ahead.
Try to plan for cooler times of the day to accomplish important tasks and then plan to be indoors when the heat index is at its maximum.
And Dr. Peterson says that staying hydrated should always be part of your game plan. She recommends that the average person intake about 62 ounces of water per day. Lauren Tier, KLTV 7 News.
It is important to look after your mind and the minds of those who are most vulnerable around you, including kids, the elderly, the heavily medicated, and those who have to spend most or all of their day outside.